My husband secretly sent his mother $1,000 a month while telling me we couldn't afford our daughter's therapy or a new water heater. Then I discovered he'd hidden nearly $27,000 from our family to repay a childhood debt his mother had invented. The bank employee turned her monitor toward me and asked why my husband had been sending his mother exactly $1,000 on the third day of every month. I thought she had confused our account with someone else's. My husband, Mark, had spent the previous year telling me we could not afford preschool 5 days a week, a new water heater, or even the dental crown I kept postponing. Yet 22 transfers had left a private account I did not know existed. The total was $22,000. 2 days earlier, Mark had asked me to sell my car so we could qualify for a better mortgage rate. Why was he quietly financing his mother's life while our daughter waited for services we said were too expensive? And why did his mother have a spreadsheet claiming the payments were not gifts, but installments on a debt Mark supposedly owed her from childhood? My name is Emma. I was 34 when I learned that my marriage had been operating with two budgets, the one Mark and I discussed, and the one he protected from me. Mark was 36 and worked as an electrical engineer. I managed purchasing for a medical supply company. We were not poor, but the previous 3 years had been expensive. Our daughter Lily was 5 and needed weekly occupational therapy for sensory and fine motor delays. Insurance covered part of it, but our share averaged $480 a month. Daycare and preschool cost another $1,350. We also owned a small house built in 1978. The roof had 5 useful years left, according to the inspector, but the water heater had begun leaking around the base. We kept a metal pan beneath it and checked the floor every morning. Mark and I earned about $142,000 combined. On paper, we should have felt comfortable. In practice, we were carrying $11,600 in credit card debt from Lily's birth, an emergency surgery for our dog, and repairs after a storm. We had started tracking every grocery purchase and delaying anything that was not urgent. I believed we were doing that together. Mark's mother, Linda, was 62. She had been divorced for 15 years and lived 40 minutes away in a 3-bedroom house. She worked part-time at a real estate office and received a pension from the county where she had spent 27 years in administration. Linda described herself as independent, but she often created emergencies that required an audience. A broken garage door spring became a family crisis. A medical test with normal results became a week of ominous group messages. If Mark did not answer quickly, Linda told him he had forgotten who raised him. Mark had one younger sister, Paige, who lived in another state. Paige responded to Linda's pressure by limiting contact. Mark responded by trying harder. During our first years of marriage, Linda sometimes asked Mark for small amounts. He would tell me before sending them. We covered a $280 car repair once and paid $600 toward a property tax shortfall another year. I did not object because the requests were specific and occasional. Then Linda stopped asking in front of me. The first sign came 18 months before I discovered the transfers. Mark said his annual bonus had been smaller than expected. We had planned to put $8,000 toward our credit cards, but only $3,900 appeared in our joint account. Mark explained that taxes, benefit adjustments, and a previous payroll advance had reduced it. I was disappointed but did not question him. He handled his payroll portal, and the explanation sounded ordinary. 3 months later, Lily's therapist recommended adding a second weekly session for 12 weeks. The extra cost would be $720 a month. Mark said we could not do it without using a credit card. He told me, "Emma, we have to be realistic. We cannot solve every problem with money." I hated the sentence because Lily's therapist was not selling a luxury. Still, I agreed to one weekly session and asked for exercises we could do at home. I began waking at 5:45 a.m. twice a week to practice buttons, scissors, and handwriting with Lily before work. That same summer, Linda remodeled her kitchen. She posted photographs of white cabinets, quartz counters, and a 6-burner stove. When I asked whether she had refinanced, Linda said she had found a contractor who understood that good clients deserved flexible terms. Mark changed the subject. At Thanksgiving, Linda showed everyone plans for a covered patio. Paige laughed and asked whether Linda had won the lottery. Linda replied that careful women always found a way. I noticed Mark staring at his plate, but I assumed he was tired. Our own water heater worsened in January. A plumber quoted $2,450 to replace it and bring the venting up to code. Mark suggested waiting until spring because our credit card balance had finally fallen below $9,000. I told Mark that waiting could damage the floor. He replied, "If you want it now, something else has to go." We reviewed our budget. Mark proposed reducing Lily's summer program, canceling a planned visit to my parents, and selling my 6-year-old Honda for a cheaper vehicle. His car was newer and had a loan, so he said mine was the logical asset to use. I felt resentful, but I also felt guilty for resenting math. I started researching used cars. The discovery happened because we decided to refinance our mortgage and consolidate the remaining high-interest debt. The lender requested statements for every checking and savings account connected to either spouse. Mark uploaded our joint accounts, but the loan officer found a recurring transfer from his payroll deposit to an account ending in 4418. She asked for 2 months of statements from that account. Mark told me it was an old personal account he barely used. He said he would retrieve the statements that evening. The next morning, the loan officer called while Mark was in a meeting. She said the statements he uploaded showed a recurring $1,000 external transfer and asked whether it was continuing debt or voluntary support. The answer affected our monthly obligations. I asked which transfer she meant. The loan officer read the recipient name, Linda Mercer. I remember looking at the water stains spreading beneath our utility room pan while the loan officer explained that she needed a written clarification, not a marital argument. I thanked her, ended the call, and checked our old joint statements. Every month, Mark's payroll deposit was lower than the amount shown on his pay stub summaries. I had assumed deductions varied. In reality, he had split his direct deposit. Most entered our joint account. Between $1,200 and $1,600 went into account 4418. On the 3rd of each month, $1,000 left for Linda. The private account also explained the missing bonus. Mark had directed $4,000 of it there before sending Linda 3 additional transfers labeled kitchen, contractor, and appliances. I did not call him at work. I downloaded the account statements the lender had placed in our shared application folder and made a simple timeline. The first $1,000 payment occurred 2 weeks after Linda's property tax request, 22 months earlier. There was no interruption. During that period, Mark and I had paid $3,740 in credit card interest. We had declined extra therapy for Lily, postponed the water heater, and canceled our only family trip. Mark came home at 6:20 p.m. carrying groceries. He saw the printed statements on the table and stopped. I asked him, "How long were you planning to keep sending Linda $1,000 a month without telling me?" Mark put down the bags and said, "I can explain, but you need to understand that it is complicated." I told him the transfers were simple enough to total. What was complicated was deciding which part of our life had been real. Mark admitted Linda had called him crying after receiving a notice about overdue property taxes. She said she might lose the house. Mark agreed to help for 6 months. Linda then revealed other debts, including a home equity line, medical bills, and money she said she had borrowed to support him when he was younger. Mark said, "She sacrificed everything for Paige and me. I could not let her lose the house." I asked why he had not told me. Mark replied that I would have demanded documents and made Linda feel humiliated. He was correct that I would have requested documents. He treated that as proof that secrecy had been necessary. I asked whether Linda still faced foreclosure. Mark said no. The taxes had been paid within the first 3 months. The remaining transfers were repaying what Linda called family debt. That was the first time I heard about the spreadsheet. Linda had listed expenses from Mark's childhood and early adulthood: braces, community college tuition, a used car at 17, rent during one unemployed summer, and $12,000 she claimed to have contributed to his university costs. She calculated that Mark owed her $48,600. then reduced it to $36,000 because she did not charge interest. I asked Mark whether Linda had told him at the time that those expenses were loans. Mark said she had called them sacrifices. He added that good children repaid sacrifices when they became successful. I asked whether Paige was paying too. Mark said Paige refused to discuss it. I told Mark to stop the automatic transfer immediately. He said he could not do that without warning Linda because she had built her monthly budget around it. I replied that Lily and I had built our monthly budget around his full income. Mark slept in the guest room. The next morning, he paused the next transfer, but would not promise to end the arrangement. He said we needed family counseling, by which he meant a meeting with Linda. I said our first meeting would be with a marriage counselor and a financial planner. Until then, I moved my salary into a new individual account and transferred half of the joint checking balance, leaving enough for automatic household bills. I did not touch retirement funds or hide money. I documented every movement. Mark called that punitive. I told him separate visibility was the smallest response to learning he had maintained a secret budget for nearly 2 years. Linda called me that afternoon. She said, "Emma, a wife should not interfere with a son's responsibility to his mother." I asked Linda whether the payments were needed for housing or repayment of a documented loan. Linda said both. When I asked for the property tax notice and loan agreements, she accused me of treating family like a business. I told Linda that she had turned family into a business the moment she created an invoice for childhood. Linda then said something important. She told me Mark had known about his obligation since our wedding. After the call, I asked Mark whether that was true. He said Linda had joked for years that he owed her, but the spreadsheet had appeared only after the tax problem. He looked genuinely startled that she had described it differently. Paige contacted me the next day. Linda had called her and claimed I was preventing Mark from paying a legal debt. Paige asked to see the spreadsheet because Linda had sent her a similar document 3 years earlier. Paige's version listed many of the same household expenses, but Linda had divided them differently. Both siblings were charged the full cost of a family car. Both were charged for the same roof repair, described as necessary because teenagers had increased wear on the house. Linda had charged Paige $9,000 for university tuition, even though Paige had scholarships and student loans. More importantly, Paige had kept old bank records from their late father's estate. A college account funded by their father had paid $11,840 directly to Mark's university. Linda's spreadsheet claimed she had paid $12,000 herself. The supposed debt was not an imperfect memory. It was a collection of ordinary parenting costs, duplicated expenses, and at least one payment Linda had not made. Paige also told me Linda's pension and part-time income totaled about $4,700 a month. Her mortgage payment was $1,180. The home equity line existed, but Linda had increased it to fund the kitchen and patio, not to avoid foreclosure. I showed Mark the 2 spreadsheets and the estate statements. He became quiet for several minutes. Then he said, Linda might have made mistakes, but still deserved help. I agreed that he could give his mother money from a transparent personal allowance after our shared obligations were funded. What he could not do was rewrite secret transfers as a moral duty that outranked our child's care. Mark accused me of forcing him to choose between his wife and mother. I told him the choice was between an honest marriage and a hidden one. Our counselor, Dr. Shaw, asked Mark to describe what he believed would happen if he stopped paying. Mark said Linda would panic, call relatives, and tell everyone he had abandoned her. Dr. Shaw asked whether those consequences were financial or emotional. Mark admitted they were mostly emotional. The distinction changed him more than any argument I made. Mark agreed to a complete financial review. We discovered he had sent Linda $26,940 in total, the 22 monthly transfers, $4,000 from his bonus, and $940 for appliances. He had also carried $2,300 on his private credit card for patio materials. Our financial planner calculated that the secrecy had cost our household another $3,180 in interest and delayed savings. Mark had not only moved money, he had moved debt back onto us. Linda responded to the canceled payment by escalating. She sent a group email to 12 relatives saying Mark's wife had frozen his accounts and endangered her home. She attached one page of her spreadsheet, but omitted the duplicated items and renovation spending. I did not reply to the group. Mark did. He wrote that I had frozen nothing, that he had concealed transfers, and that Linda's property taxes were current. He said future support would require a real budget and would come only after our household obligations. Linda called him ungrateful and said she would remove him from her will. Mark answered, "Mom, if money in your will requires me to lie to my wife now, keep it." It was the first clear boundary I had ever heard him give her. Linda then announced that the kitchen renovation had increased the value of a future inheritance Mark would share. Paige replied that Linda had already promised the house to her in exchange for helping with medical care later. That was the second major revelation. Linda had told Mark his payments protected an asset for both siblings. She had separately told Paige that the home would belong to Paige because Mark was financially secure. Paige forwarded an email in which Linda wrote, "Mark is helping with expenses, but that does not give him ownership. The house should stay with the child who will actually be here." Mark read the message twice. His $26,940 had not purchased equity, repaid a real loan, or saved a home from immediate loss. It had protected Linda from the consequences of remodeling while allowing her to promise the same house strategically to 2 children. Linda demanded an in-person family meeting. We agreed only if Paige could join by video, and everyone brought records. At the meeting, Linda placed her spreadsheet on the dining table and said parents had a right to expect gratitude. I placed the 2 versions beside it. Paige displayed the estate statement showing their father's college account. Mark brought the transfer history and a printout of Linda's real estate listing photos showing the new kitchen and patio. Mark asked Linda one question: "What exact debt did the last $10,000 repay?" Linda first said tuition. Paige identified the estate payment. Linda changed the answer to housing and food during college. Mark reminded her he had lived on campus with a meal plan. Linda then said the number represented everything she had given up emotionally. There was no document that could reconcile emotional sacrifice at $1,000 per month. Linda cried and accused us of putting her on trial. Mark told her nobody was asking her to repay normal gifts or prove she had been a perfect mother. We were asking her to stop presenting invented debts as fixed obligations. Linda refused to apologize. She said the family would eventually understand what I had done. The meeting ended, but the financial consequences continued. Mark sold stock from an employee purchase plan that had always been considered his separate discretionary asset. After taxes, it produced $18,400. He put that money toward our joint credit cards and the water heater. He redirected his next bonus to restore the remainder over 12 months. I did not demand that he replace every dollar immediately from retirement funds. I demanded a written recovery plan, shared access to all accounts, and a rule that neither spouse could give or lend more than $300 without agreement. We also signed a postnuptial agreement stating that undisclosed personal debts or gifts would remain the responsibility of the spouse who created them. Some people told me a postnuptial agreement was cold. Living beside a leaking water heater while $1,000 disappeared every month had been colder. We enrolled Lily in the additional therapy block. By the end of 12 weeks, she could fasten her coat, tolerate hairbrushing, and write her name without crying. Watching those changes made the hidden transfers feel more concrete. Every payment had represented choices we were told did not exist. Mark struggled with guilt after ending the arrangement. Linda called less often but sent messages on each former payment date. Sometimes she wrote only, "I hope your new family is worth it." Mark learned not to answer immediately. In counseling, he began recognizing that Linda used money to convert love into a balance sheet she controlled. 6 months later, Linda listed her house. She told relatives she had been forced to sell because Mark abandoned her. The listing price was $468,000, and public records showed she owed about $139,000 between the mortgage and equity line. She purchased a smaller townhouse in cash and still retained substantial savings. The sale proved what the budget had already shown. Linda had options. She had preferred Mark's secrecy because it allowed her to keep every option for herself. Paige and Mark rebuilt their relationship slowly. For years, Linda had told each sibling that the other was selfish. Comparing records showed them that isolation had been part of the pressure. My marriage did not return to normal simply because the transfers stopped. For months, I checked accounts more often than I wanted. Mark understood that transparency was not the same as trust. Transparency was the evidence from which trust might grow again. There was one setback that nearly ended the attempt. 4 months into counseling, Linda asked Mark for $2,700 to replace her furnace. Mark did not send it, but he called the heating company and placed the repair on his personal credit card before telling me. He believed he had followed our rule because the money did not come from a joint account. I told him the issue was not which plastic card he used. He had again committed household income to Linda first and planning to explain later. Mark canceled the charge within an hour, then asked Linda to send the inspection and 2 estimates. The company confirmed the furnace needed a $340 control board, not full replacement. Linda had chosen a premium new system because the salesperson offered financing. Mark apologized without arguing that the smaller amount made his choice harmless. That moment mattered more than a perfect record would have. He recognized the pattern while there was still time to undo it. Linda accused us of forcing her to live without heat. Paige arranged the control board repair directly and sent everyone the paid invoice. The house was warm the next day. No emergency required $2,700, but the dramatic version had almost reopened the secret budget. After that, Mark created a simple response he used for every request. Send the bill, give me 1 day, and I will discuss it with Emma. Linda hated the sentence because it removed urgency and isolation, the 2 conditions under which she had always been most persuasive. A year after the discovery, we refinanced successfully. Our credit card balance was 0, the water heater was new, and we had 6 months of expenses in savings. I kept my Honda. Mark never again suggested that my car was the obvious sacrifice. Linda did not attend Lily's 6th birthday because Mark would not allow her to discuss the family dispute at the party. She mailed an expensive gift instead. We returned it and told her a card was enough. That boundary mattered. We no longer accepted objects that could later become entries on another spreadsheet. Mark and Linda now speak twice a month. He does not share our account balances, and he does not respond to financial requests without waiting 24 hours. When Linda needed $420 for an actual dental copayment, she sent the bill. Mark and Paige split it voluntarily after discussing it. The process was calm because the need was real and the choice was informed. I am sometimes asked why I stayed. I stayed because Mark eventually stopped defending the lie, accepted measurable consequences, restored the money, and did the uncomfortable work of changing his relationship with his mother. Staying was not instant forgiveness. It was a monitored decision that he had to keep earning. The part I still find hardest is not the $26,940. It is remembering Mark telling me we could not solve every problem with money while he quietly used our money to solve his mother's discomfort. He had made restraint a rule for Lily and me, but not for Linda. Now, our budget includes individual spending accounts. Mark can use his for gifts to his mother if he chooses. I can use mine without explaining every purchase. Shared goals are funded first, and no hidden account is treated as harmless privacy. The original spreadsheet remains in our financial file beside the estate statement and transfer history. Not because I plan to confront Linda again, but because it reminds us how easily guilt can imitate debt when nobody asks for evidence. I also keep a copy of the first budget we made after the discovery. It lists therapy, repairs, debt, savings, and 2 equal personal allowances. Linda's name does not appear as a fixed expense. That absence is not cruelty. It is the difference between support that is chosen after facts are known and tribute collected through fear. If your spouse secretly sent his mother $1,000 a month while your family postponed therapy, repairs, and debt repayment, would you consider financial transparency and repayment enough to rebuild the marriage? Or would the hidden second budget end it for you?